The sun beat down on Jerusalem, yet a deeper shadow clung to the burgeoning community of believers, a shadow not of buildings, but of economic strain and relentless external threat. This was the volatile cradle of the church, a place where shared faith was tested daily by the harsh realities of scarcity and the ever-present danger of persecution. The sounds of the city were a cacophony of commerce and caution, but within the gathered group there was a profound, aching silence surrounding the needs of the widows, the vulnerable, and the new converts stripped of their livelihoods. The ideal of communal life, beautiful in its spiritual vision, was buckling under the weight of material necessity. It was a time of crisis, a period where the greatest sermon was not preached with words, but demonstrated through radical, self-emptying action, demanding a rare breed of courage and commitment from its adherents. Into this crucible of need stepped a man known by two names, Joseph, a Levite, born on the island of Cyprus, and Barnabas, an epithet given to him by the apostles themselves. Joseph, a man of esteemed lineage and material comfort, deliberately chose to dismantle the security of his old life. He was not a fiery orator like Peter, nor a rigorous scholar like the future Paul. His authority was silent, rooted entirely in the sacrifice of his possessions. His profile was one of quiet, unassuming wealth turned into communal strength. This act of disencumbering himself was more than a mere transaction. It was a profound theological statement, a living proof that the material world held less value than the kingdom they were building. His initial impact was therefore foundational, establishing the moral currency necessary for the immense, courageous acts he would perform later. Barnabas, the Levite, had no title other than the one bestowed by his character, son of consolation or son of encouragement. His origin was distant, his background comfortable, yet his heart was wholly invested in the fragile, persecuted core of the Jerusalem church. He possessed an intrinsic sensitivity to the spiritual and material hunger of others, a deep empathy that transcended the normal boundaries of ethnic or historical division. This man's genius was not in leading from the front, but in seeing potential in the shadows and building bridges where fear had erected walls. His was an obedience to God that was expressed not in dramatic defiance, but in humble, persistent support, understanding that the strength of a community is measured by its capacity to care for its weakest and to uplift its most doubted members. He became a moral compass in a time of great suspicion, in a community grappling with the immense task of sustaining itself while navigating political and religious hostility. Joseph's willingness to surrender his Cypriot land, the very basis of his familial identity and security, provided immediate relief and long-term inspiration. His name, Barnabas, became a living metaphor, a promise whispered among the fearful that help would always be found. This simple, profound transfer of wealth from a singular private estate to the collective treasury of the apostles fundamentally secured his position as a man of action, setting the stage for his far greater and more perilous act, extending trust where all others saw only danger, and offering a vital second chance to the church's greatest adversary. Before we continue with the message that sealed the destiny of the apostle to the Gentiles, we would like to take a brief moment to thank you for being here. If the spirit of self-giving and radical trust is resonating with you, please consider subscribing and letting us know in the comments which city you are watching from. Your support is the modern-day encouragement that helps us continue building these narratives. The divine call that shaped Barnabas was not a thunderous declaration on a mount, but a quiet, compelling resonance in his very spirit. It was the moment he saw the radical implications of the gospel, that love demanded more than simple assent. It demanded liquidation and dedication. For Barnabas, the voice of God was not a literal sound, but a profound conviction that the shared life of the early church was the true testament of their resurrected Christ. and that his wealth was merely a tool for this greater purpose. This quiet, inner assent to a radical generosity was his true commission, setting him on a path not of preaching fame, but of indispensable behind-the-scenes service, preparing him to face the most terrifying antagonism the young church had ever known. The ultimate challenge to Barnabas's calling arrived in the form of fear, the primal, debilitating fear that paralyzed the nascent church in Jerusalem. Their opposition was not a singular antagonist, but the collective raw terror associated with the name Saul of Tarsus, the former, most feared persecutor of the way. This man, a venomous, systematic hunter of believers, now claimed conversion, yet the apostles and the faithful saw only a dangerous trap, a Trojan horse designed to dismantle them from within. Barnabas stood in stark contrast to this collective paralysis. His steady, encouraging spirit challenged the system's understandable, yet ultimately faithless caution. The message of God, calling for radical forgiveness and audacious welcome, directly confronted the comfortable, self-preserving fear that threatened to extinguish the light of the newfound apostle to the Gentiles. The principal content of Barnabas's ministry was a living, breathing sermon on the nature of grace, directly contrasting with the rigid skepticism and institutional fear surrounding Paul. While others focused on doctrinal correctness and undeniable historical assurance, Barnabas highlighted the limitless reach of God's redemptive power, arguing that if Christ could transform a relentless persecutor, then no one was beyond the pale of reconciliation. His actions served as a powerful indictment of a faith that was willing to limit God's transformative work, prioritizing self-protection over divine expansion. He saw the fire in Saul's eyes, the intensity that had once been used for destruction, and correctly prophesied that it could now be harnessed for the greatest evangelical good. This vision of potential, rather than the memory of persecution, was his grand alert to a cautious and terrified church. The essence of Barnabas's life was distilled into the truth of his title, Barnabas, which is translated Son of Consolation or Encouragement. This was not a mere nickname. It was a divine assignment, a defining characteristic that spoke volumes louder than any theological treatise. His role was to be the human antidote to despair and doubt, the spiritual bridge built on the bedrock of trust. The profound meaning of this phrase lay in its active nature. He did not just offer passive comfort, but proactive, risk-taking. Encouragement, a spiritual force that pushed potential into practice. Where others saw a dangerous wolf in sheep's clothing, Barnabas, the son of consolation, saw a lost sheep transformed, and his action made that transformation undeniable to the world. Barnabas's courage was a clarion call against the hypocrisy of a faith that prayed for salvation but feared its radical manifestation. The apostles were willing to believe in the abstract possibility of conversion, but when it stood before them, in the person of Saul, their belief wavered into fear, demonstrating a disconnect between their professed doctrine and their practiced trust. Barnabas's intervention was a sharp denunciation of this spiritual inertia. He forced them to confront the reality that a faith that cannot forgive its enemies and empower its converts is a faith that has stopped believing in the unlimited power of its own gospel. The silent message was, true consolation means risking your own reputation to save the soul and mission of another. The deep-seated indifference and paralyzing fear among the believers intensified the urgency of Barnabas's message. They were content to remain safe within the walls of Jerusalem, sustained by their own communal resources, but terrified of embracing the raw, untamed potential of Saul, the man destined for the Gentiles. This reluctance was a silent act of mutiny against the Great Commission. Barnabas's persistent advocacy was necessary because their caution was not prudence. It was a failure of imagination, a betrayal of the radical expansion commanded by Christ. He understood that the longer they delayed accepting Paul, the longer the unreached world would remain without the gospel, a spiritual emergency demanding immediate, personal intervention. He did not shy away from confronting the entrenched skepticism. His great alert was an appeal to the very nature of their Lord, who had sought out the marginalized and the unlikely. The apostles, while honoring his generosity, initially dismissed his pleas as perhaps naive enthusiasm. The memory of Saul's violence was too fresh, too painful for them to simply accept a story. Barnabas, however, did not rely on sentiment. He presented verifiable testimony, detailing Saul's radical encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus and his subsequent courageous but initially isolated preaching in that city. This factual yet deeply personal defense turned the abstract claim into an undeniable historical record, forcing the cautious hierarchy to reconsider their rigid stance. Barnabas's argument was built on the unshakable foundation of grace. He challenged the apostles to view Saul not through the lens of their past injuries, but through the transformative prism of the cross. If their Savior could die for their persecutor, how could they, the redeemed, not extend a hand of acceptance? The strength of his case lay in its sheer simplicity and its alignment with the core tenets of their faith. He was, in essence, demanding that they practice the very radical love they preached, highlighting the absurdity of believing in a God of miracles while refusing to believe in the miraculous conversion standing before them. The indifference was not malicious, but a product of profound trauma, a self-preservation mechanism that threatened to throttle the church's forward movement. The established leaders, having survived intense persecution, were hesitant to introduce a variable so volatile as Saul. Barnabas, the quiet revolutionary, saw this reticence as the greater danger. His persistent, calm, and undeniable presence served as a constant pressure point on the established order. He forced them to choose between their personal safety and the global mandate of the gospel, making it clear that true faith required a calculated risk on God's redemptive power, exemplified by the very man they feared most. Thus, the Son of Consolation did not console with soft words, but with a monumental act of trust. He consoled the worried hearts of the apostles by vouching for Paul with his own reputation, effectively placing his established, unassailable moral authority, earned through the gift of his land, as collateral for a man universally distrusted. This exchange was the true climax of his warning. The message was unmistakable. Only by risking everything could they gain the man who would eventually carry the gospel to the ends of the earth. His conviction was the silent, powerful engine that broke the logjam of fear, finally convincing the apostles to open their hearts and their doors to the future of the church. The climax narrativo, the moment of divine intervention, materialized not with fire or a literal voice from the heavens, but in a quiet room in Jerusalem where the destinies of three parties converged: the fearful apostles, the isolated and desperate Saul, and the mediating figure of Barnabas. Barnabas, acting as the human conduit of God's redemptive will, physically stepped between the two groups. It was a vision of reconciliation, where the memory of the persecutor was erased by the testimony of the convert, but only through the assurance of the encourager. This was God acting through the audacious compassion of one man, using a humble bridge builder to span the chasm of historical enmity and suspicion. Barnabas's vision was of unity, a foresight that saw beyond the immediate crisis. He didn't just relate facts. He interpreted the depth of Paul's conversion, detailing the unwavering commitment and personal cost of his transformation. His action was a vivid demonstration that God works through the courageous extension of trust, revealing that the true miracle was not just Saul's conversion, but the church's capacity to forgive and embrace. This meeting, brokered by the Son of Consolation, marked the point of no return. The Church, by accepting Saul, fully committed to its universal, Gentile-reaching mission, a commitment that was impossible without the mediator's unique moral authority. The weight of this mission rested heavily on Barnabas. He was not merely a messenger, he was an intercessor, placing his own reputation on the line, a precious commodity earned through his initial act of radical generosity. We can imagine the profound human anxiety, the fear that he might be wrong about Paul, the possibility of betrayal that could destroy the entire community and his own standing. Yet his empathy for Saul's isolated plight, a man trapped between a past he had renounced and a future that rejected him, compelled him forward. This humanization of his mission, the willingness to suffer potential ridicule or disaster for the sake of another's potential, defined his true prophet-like status. His role was repeated years later, underscoring his permanent identity as the Son of Consolation. When the new Gentile converts in Antioch needed teaching, the apostles immediately thought of Barnabas as the stable, encouraging presence required for integration. He again acted as the divine hand, traveling to Tarsus to retrieve the now isolated Saul, effectively giving him his second active opportunity in ministry. This was not a passive intercession, it was an active pursuit, a realization that Paul's potential needed a partner to draw it out. Barnabas saw the need for a co-laborer, a partnership that would launch the greatest missionary movement in history. Barnabas's life thus serves as a powerful testament to the truth that the most crucial divine interventions often take the form of human encouragement and courageous advocacy. The turning point in the Christian story, the effective launch of the Gentile mission, depended entirely on Barnabas's willingness to see potential where others saw peril, to mediate where others preferred distance, and to give his personal endorsement where historical evidence argued against it. His intercession was the indispensable catalyst, the human hinge upon which the door of world evangelism swung open. The inevitable consequence of historical suspicion, the exposure of error, eventually manifested in the bitter debate between Paul and Barnabas over John Mark. The certainty of the judgment, that even the most foundational partnership would be broken by a failure of trust and persistence, was a harsh lesson in human frailty. John Mark's earlier retreat from the mission field exposed the inherent flaw in even the most dedicated disciples: the lack of enduring commitment. This disagreement, though painful, served a critical purpose. It affirmed that the work of God would not be confined to a single, perfect partnership, but would multiply through necessary division, spreading the message to more regions. This painful separation was directly connected to the inherent risk of the encouragement Barnabas specialized in. The apostles' initial fear of Saul had been replaced by Barnabas's insistence on a second chance for John Mark, a risk Paul was unwilling to take. The consequence, the sharp and public disagreement, exposed the profound difficulty of balancing justice, Paul's demand for reliability, and mercy, Barnabas's plea for restoration. This painful event was not a sign of failure, but a demonstration of the unwavering law of spiritual cause and effect. Every decision, even one rooted in good intentions, has ripple effects, multiplying the ministry geographically while simultaneously exposing the relational cost of differing convictions. The final exposure of error was the realization that even the most inspired of relationships must sometimes break for the greater good of the mission. Barnabas's commitment to his nephew, John Mark, and his unshakable belief in the power of a second chance led him to an undeniable split with Paul. This rupture, though seemingly a defeat, guaranteed that the gospel would immediately penetrate two separate new fields of ministry, Paul's and Barnabas's, a greater expansion than a single, united team might have achieved. The lesson was clear: while unity is the ideal, God can even use the painful consequences of human disagreement to relentlessly advance his kingdom, turning personal conviction into global movement. A profound shift in tone, a glimmer of light, emerges from the very pain of the separation. The seemingly broken partnership with Paul did not diminish Barnabas's calling. Instead, it reaffirmed his core identity as the son of consolation. His decision to continue with John Mark was a bold public demonstration that his true ministry was the cultivation of potential, proving that the most important work sometimes involves pouring into the discouraged and the marginalized. This was God's unwavering faithfulness at work, showing that there would always be an encorajador available for those who had stumbled, a quiet assurance that no failure is final in the kingdom. The promise embedded in Barnabas's life is this: God always provides a bridge, a human agent of encouragement for those standing on the edge of rejection or defeat. Barnabas became the ultimate restorer of potential, taking the very man who had failed, John Mark, and nurturing him back into ministry, a mission that bore eternal fruit, as Mark would eventually write the gospel that bears his name. This act proves that the Lord reserves a work for those who dare to see the finished product in the broken beginning, ensuring that no talent is permanently lost to discouragement or past mistake. We must reflect upon and recontextualize the frasilema obligatoria, Barnabas, which is translated son of consolation or encouragement. When first heard, this phrase was a testament to his generosity and his courage in accepting Paul, focusing on the overcoming of past malice. Now, in the shadow of the painful separation from Paul, the phrase takes on a deeper redemptive hue. It becomes a testament to enduring faithfulness and unyielding grace, demonstrating that the truest test of consolation is not in supporting the heroic, but in lifting up the failed. The unwavering legacy of Barnabas is his silent affirmation that the gospel's power lies not just in its doctrinal perfection, but in the practical, messy application of grace. His willingness to sacrifice the comfort of his partnership with Paul for the sake of one young man's restoration underscores the eternal hope that even when we stumble, God's provision, a son of consolation, will be there to lift us up. The work of God is always sustained by those who refuse to allow a single failure to define a person's entire destiny, proving the enduring truth of God's restorative commitment to the potential of the overlooked. The profound legacy of Barnabas is distilled into this great idea. The true measure of faith lies in the humble, courageous act of extending active, costly trust to those who are feared, rejected, or have failed. His life, from the initial radical self-emptying to his final sacrificial stand for John Mark, defines a leadership style not of dominance, but of enablement. He was the human pivot, the essential intermediary who ensured the transition of the gospel from a localized Jewish sect to a universal, world-conquering movement. His enduring instruction is that the most powerful force in any spiritual community is the ability to see and nurture the potential hidden beneath a cloak of fear or past mistake. This singular life presents a timeless spiritual lesson for the modern believer. Encouragement is not a soft suggestion. It is a spiritual imperative, a fundamental act of faith. What is the grasshopper in your life today? The fear, the systemic skepticism, or the self-imposed limit that prevents you from reaching out to the difficult, the unproven, or the one who has failed you? Barnabas challenges us to move beyond passive pity to active, reputation-risking advocacy. The question is whether we are willing to risk our established comfort and standing to become the indispensable bridge for another person's God-given destiny. The story of the Son of Consolation is a powerful, final declaration on the absolute sovereignty of God. It shows that God's plan is so vast, so unshakable, that he will use any available means: the sacrifice of a wealthy Levite, the transformation of a violent persecutor, or even the painful dissolution of a missionary team to ensure the gospel's expansion. The ultimate lesson is not about the pain of separation, but the power of multiplication. God is relentlessly at work, always providing a second chance, always securing a champion for the overlooked, and always ensuring that his promise of restoration will be fulfilled. Barnabas is the eternal testament to the power of the unsung hero, the man who understood that true greatness is found not in personal achievement, but in creating the conditions for others' success. His life is the quiet, undeniable proof that the most potent force in the world is a faith translated into radical generosity and relentless encouragement. His legacy is the Mark's gospel and the global sweep of Paul's letters, achievements fundamentally rooted in the single courageous decision of a man who believed in the transformation of a feared adversary and the restoration of a failed apprentice. If this message of courage, justice, and restoration has touched your heart, we invite you to acknowledge that transformative power by liking and sharing this video. Your participation helps this essential message of second chances reach those who need encouragement most. And if you are not yet subscribed, join our community of seekers as we continue to uncover the hidden heroes and timeless lessons of the biblical narrative. Barnabas, which is translated son of consolation or encouragement.